Strong Conversations.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Strong Conversations, Hot Takes from a Cultural Firebrand. Still Dr. Carolyn Strong, still your cultural firebrand, still trying to change the world one conversation at a time. So today we are talking about one of the things that I'm most passionate about, which is finding spaces where African American children can be safe and secure and valued and celebrated and not just simply tolerated within educational spaces. If you've been kind of following the page for a while, you know one of the things that I always say is public education was founded or started when African American students were still considered 3/5 of a human being. So with that being said, we weren't even considered in the educational process when it was coming to pass and coming to light. And since then, all we've done when we try to put students of color into the system is attempt to put square pegs in round holes. And one of the things that I've made my mission is to try and create square holes so that our students are not trying to contort and fit themselves into somebody else's narrative of what education should be, but we create spaces for them. And so I am very happy today that my guest is one of the change makers that is making that happen for our students. So I want to introduce to you Dr. Peggie Burnett-Wise, one of the co-founders of the Uhuru Shule Cooperative. Good morning.
Good morning, Dr. Strong.
How are you?
I am very well.
So the way things work here on this platform is you are the you expert. So tell the folks what you want them to know.
Well, my name is Peggie Burnett-Wise. I am an educator. I was an educator in the Chicago public school system for 27 years. I've been everything from a teacher, a coach, and finally, for the last 11 years, a principal at a school on the west side of Chicago. And now I'm the co-founder of Uhuru Shule and also an educational consultant, leadership consultant, working with schools in Texas and principals in Chicago. And I also am visiting assistant clinical professor at Northeastern Roosevelt University. Lord have mercy. My mother went to Northeastern Roosevelt University.
Well, I thank you for taking time with us today. So I guess the burning question that I have, which is kind of what made me reach out to you in the first place, is you've been within systems for quite some time and making change within those systems. What happened to make you step out of those systems and do something different for our kids?
Well, I think being within the system allowed me to see that there was so much entrenched bias, implicit bias, so much systemic, right? I mean, systemic, that's the foundation, that is very difficult for our children to navigate those spaces with primarily white teachers, primarily female teachers, white teachers. And it takes years to just kind of unpack all the biases, even though we try best we can. And I just felt like I worked really hard to do the best I can within the system. It was time for us to move outside of the system and do what we know is best for our children, which is empower them, strengthen them without the hindrance of bias. It's just not fair to them to have to navigate those spaces at such a young age, not fully developed mentally, physically, and emotionally. So we've been trying it as a people for as long as we can. We could. I mean, we didn't have a choice. Let's try it another way. And that really was what motivated me. And then from there, I began to seek out like-minded parents. It was was an awesome time because well, awesome time. It was an opportunity time because it was right at the start of pandemic. Traditional school had shut down, and it was not hard to find other parents who had a similar sentiment, especially within our community. So we started small, and we're still small. But what I didn't realize it's a growing movement with all over the United States with African American parents pulling their children out of public schools and homeschooling them.
So let's start there. I want to sit with that because that was really what started me down this road with this topic, is that it becomes very difficult as a parent to find spaces that are going to educate your child with the rigor that you want while still operating in a mindset of celebrating your child and not tolerating your child, because
Absolutely.
that's what we see a lot of. It's like, especially when you're talking about higher performing settings or maybe a private setting, it's like, yeah, as long as your check is clearing, you can bring your baby here, but what is my baby getting after that check clears
Exactly.
and I'm leaving them there and walking out the door? Like, what are you fully embracing all parts of my child? Are you educating them in a colorblind fashion, which those of us in DEI spaces already know that saying that you're colorblind is ignoring a whole part of who that child is, ignoring their culture, ignoring their history. And then from an educated or professional lens, now you're ignoring what could be different ways in which they learn
Right.
because you're being colorblind.
Right.
So
So
go ahead.
no, no, no. I mean, I'm thinking about a book I have about Black homeschooling here. Well, one of the things that really motivated me was having a gifted young child and also a Black boy, gifted. And I just knew walking into that space that there was going to be no school that was going to be able to fully, as an educator and as an educational administrator, I knew that him getting what he needed out of us public school space or private school space would be zero to none. Because remember, the goal is Carolyn, is to keep everybody the same. So you present a problem if you're different. It's not an opportunity to them. So that was a motivation
Not
as
even in
well,
gifted spaces.
not even in gifted spaces. So that belief that if I put my child in a so-called gifted school, they'll get what they need. Most gifted schools are not differentiated and personalized learning focused as well. And as we all know, most gifted children have a slew of mental health, not negative challenges, but opportunities,
Social, social.
social, emotional needs,
Hmm.
anxiety, stress, and they don't get what they need in those settings. So that was also a motivation for me as well. I wanted to see if we could create an environment where kids could all receive what they individually need with a culturally affirming um, motto or mission and vision. What's exciting is after that, I did some research about Black homeschooling and homeschooling in general. People associate homeschooling oftentimes with that Christian
I was gonna
movement,
say religious.
religious
Mhm.
movement, but there are that's not all of what homeschooling means. Now that the Christian right picked it up because they didn't want the influence of children to have, the influence of
Secular world.
the secular world. But
Mhm.
for us as Black people, as African Americans, it's a liberatory space because now we can take the boundaries off what our children are able to learn, and we can educate them in a way. So one of my motivations was a book about Black homeschooling, and she was talking about all the biases against homeschooling, like your child won't be socialized
Oh, and
when
that's
they
the big one, is that
and
they won't know how to talk to people.
untrue, 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 because most of us and all of us have our kids in activities where they will interact with other children. And in fact, it's the opposite. It's jarring for children for every school year to have to reacclimate to a new teacher and 30, and potentially 20 to 30 new kids. So just kind of breaking down those myths and stereotypes. Another stereotype that some of our parents had when they came, professionals were like, can't I get in trouble for homeschooling my child, when in fact, your
Really?
child is not. Yes, some of them were scared, like, don't you have to send your child to a traditional school setting? I said, and in the law, any parent can
And
homeschool
this
their
is
child.
Illinois law, right? Because I know the
Illinois law.
homeschooling laws vary from state to state. So you're
Right.
talking specifically about Illinois.
So specifically about Illinois, and
Okay.
also, but we did join the Homeschool Legal Defense Fund. So we, as Yahuru Shule, joined that so that we can learn more. We got access to the Google Suites, lots of little tips and things like that.
The
And so,
Homeschool Legal Defense Fund.
yes, and so what they do is they help you navigate spaces. What's law in Florida? What's law in Illinois? They tell they have a bank of different cooperatives that people have, different homeschooling individual sites where you can connect with people outside. But it's a white space. But the knowledge that I got from
I'm
there
like,
was
legal
really
defense is
helpful.
legal defense.
Absolutely. Because again, this movement is growing. It's always been there in the white community, white Christian community, but if that opportunity is for anyone. So if you want to get, some of the platforms have sites just for homeschools, and if you want to access them, some of the sites want to know that you're affiliated with some sort of national organization, and so that's why we joined, so that we could get the Google Suite for
Okay.
educators for free.
So let me ask you this, because I've been calling it a micro school. How do you classify it? Do you classify it as a homeschool cooperative? Do you classify it as a homeschool, or do you classify it as a micro school?
So it's a cooperative, and it would be considered a micro school.
Okay.
And so actually there's an organization called OutSchool. I don't know if you heard about it. So they provide resources to micro
Love
schools
OutSchool.
because,
I can't tell you
yes,
how much money we spend on OutSchool every month in this house.
yes. So we are considered a micro school. So we have 5 children that are not immediate siblings that come together, and we meet at my house. We hire a teacher, because all of us are working, even though I'm an educator, and I basically facilitate and monitor the teachers' interaction. We made a collaboration with Northwestern Center for Talent Development for testing every year, just to ensure that our children are on track. Most of who, of course, are exceeding their goals in a homeschool setting. And then we also made other collaborations where our kids get art and PE and gym, and we are free to take as many field trips as we want. The children take Mandarin, and our goal is to go on an international trip next year. It's been very exciting, and liberating to us. And, our children are getting the education that we feel they need. We know they need. It's liberating to think about our kids never even having that traditional school experience. So that whole getting in line and just
Well,
having to do things that way.
you're an administrator. You've been one long enough to see the shift, because back when you started, you and I started about the same time. So back when you started, you remember what the hallmark of a good learning environment was supposed to look like. You walked in that room and you could hear a pin drop. That meant that teacher was doing the thing. Those kids were walking down the hall in that straight line and on the line and not veering, and that meant that teacher was doing the thing. And then the test scores came out, and you was like, every time I walked in there, the classroom was so quiet and they walk in a straight line. How do these test scores not match up with what you've told me a good learning environment is supposed to look like?
Because it was all a facade, and it was all a way. We're so trusting that people are doing the right things for our kids, when in fact they are not. A lot of times, those very pin drop quiet classrooms, it was a lot of suppression and not a very robust and rigorous education.
Not at all.
Not
Not
at
at
all.
all. But that's what we trained everybody to do back then. Well, not us, but that's what everybody was trained to do. Even the parents would come in and they'd be like, why does the grade look like this? My kid don't talk in your class. My
Exactly.
kid is quiet. How is this grade looking like this? She come in, she quiet, she don't bother nobody. That's at least a B right there.
But what it was like, and honestly, fine, when you think about the linkage to that, to just the enslavement of African American people, where we felt like we were suppressed, you can't talk, you can't say anything, you'll get whipped down. I mean, as an administrator, oftentimes I felt like an overseer, because you have all these white teachers in classrooms that are scared, oftentimes scared of the kids, and you feel like you're trying to get the kids in line for them, when the problem doesn't rely, it's not in the kids, it's in the adult, and all that unpacked bias. Like, why are you afraid of these children? So I mean, that's another reason for Uhuru Shula. I never want my Black child to go into a space and be treated poorly just because someone else's bias, and unpack racism, and villainize, which I think is an experience most Black people experience as part of their life. At some point, people are stepping aside when you walk. You got to move out the way when people walk through you. They like you're not seen, and then to be smart on top of that, that's a whole nother layer.
And I will be later on this month, I will be talking to Dr. Joy Lawson Davis, who is one of the more prominent people in the culturally relevant gifted community, about just that. Because one of the things that we have to remember is that even with everything you just said, when you add to that the different cultural norms and mores, like I was just talking before you came on, I was talking to my producer about the fact that I'm a mover. So when I go to these places and I present and I'm talking about DEI and I'm talking about cultural competence, and they put that podium and that mic right there, I can't do it, because I'm going to walk around. I'm going to move closer to you. I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to talk with my hands. That is just who I am as a person. And as I started to study more in the DEI spaces I'm in, that is a cultural norm and a more for a lot of us in the different culturally relevant communication styles. But if you haven't been trained to understand that, what's the word we love? Disruptive to the learning environment.
Yes.
I'm disruptive to the learning environment, because when I talk to you, I move closer to you. I'm disruptive to the learning environment because my hands are involved when I speak to you. Now I'm aggressive and disruptive.
Right. And even our tone of voice, it's like, you're loud. Well, you know what? We are a very boisterous and joyous people. We talk with our hands, our voices elevate to express our feeling. And what you find in these public facing settings is that we, instead of people learning about the way we communicate, they use that to weaponize us and call us violent or call us aggressive. And it happens to the adult and the children. So when you have a school, the parents usually are villainized because they present as themselves and they don't understand it. And so then the teachers don't want to talk to a parent. Who educates someone's child and doesn't want to have a conversation with them? But I began to become radicalized in my thinking, and I went back to the quote of Malcolm X that, like, how can you have someone that hates you educating your child? How can you have someone who does not even respect your people? How do you even get a good education out of that space? And I tried, but I couldn't make myself be comfortable with that for my own child. And unfortunately, Black people have been so assimilated that we begin to take on those kind of affects towards our children. So then you have Black
Out of
teachers.
survival.
Yes, out of survival to make yourself be able to fit in. So then you also have Black teachers adapting to that and then pressing on that. Where are you going to be in society if you don't know how to sit, if you don't know how to do this, if you can't be quiet? Well, there are a lot of entrepreneurs that never sit down and were quiet. There are a lot of people, Marcus Garvey didn't sit down and be quiet. So,
They create standing desks now because they're finally
yes,
starting to understand that sitting down and sitting in one spot for that long is not normal.
Yeah, it's not healthy. And then not talking is not helpful for your brain. Your brain grows, your dendrites grow when you talk because you get oxygen to your brain.
And
So this
it's
whole
funny. It's funny that you mentioned that because I think it was either last year or a year before. I gave my 8-year old a watch, one of the little watches, and I would check on her. And because she's in a Montessori environment, by noon she had like 12,000 steps. By noon, they hadn't even been to recess yet. So, and I was sitting here thinking, I'm like, if she was in a traditional environment, maybe if they had a bathroom break by noon, she'd have made it to what, 150 steps, depending on where the bathroom is.
and
Maybe.
then and then you wonder why childhood obesity is on the rise. If you're, being forced to sit down for 3 hours at a pop and barely can move around, and the only time you get is a 40-minute recess break, when that's not even what the American Pediatric Association says that every child should have. You should have at least an hour of outdoor play in all weathers. But it's just so much. Oh, I don't want I don't want my child to be outside, or I have to get these certain minutes in a day. So
And
homeschooling.
in some places it's just not safe.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, in some where some of our schools are located, is even if the school wants to, it's not safe for those kids to be out on that playground like that. And that's very unfortunate.
Absolutely. I mean, at the school that I was at, and I love the school, I love the work we did, but oftentimes we would have soft lockdowns or lockdowns
Mhm.
that we couldn't bring the children outside. And that's just an unfortunate reality wherever you live, in the city or in the suburbs, which is another reason why some people are opting for homeschooling too. Just this whole onslaught of school shootings, and kids have to get active shooting drills, which some parents feel, is traumatizing to their kids. And let's not begin to talk about school trauma, and how so much of your trauma can actually come from school experiences.
Absolutely. Absolutely, because especially it's so many layers for our kids. Like in
Yes,
addition to the systemic racism that you've already talked about, when you're dealing in a monolithic environment where you're talking about an all black space, now we're dealing with the other things that go on with that. We're dealing with colorism. We're dealing with, and these are not even things that we know that we're dealing with. It wasn't until I started personally writing my dissertation that I realized the amount of colorism within the school setting that I actually dealt with as a learner. It was like when I was going back and recounting those experiences, because my stuff was done autoethnography, it was like, wait a minute. I had the highest grades in the class, but the little light skinned girl with the long hair was the one that got to watch the class when the teacher left. Why is
hmm
that? Just those things like that you're unpacking, or even the research that I started doing about, even when you're dealing in an all black setting, the amount of referrals, discipline referrals that would be sent for darker skinned students. So it's
right.
just so much stuff there. So I guess taking all of that into consideration, how do you in your micro school, obviously you've created this loving space so you're not dealing with that, but how do you integrate like cultural relevancy and representation and still maintain a rigor? Because a lot of people think that when you go into a culturally affirming environment, you're doing it at the sacrifice of the rigor.
So, and I think I thought I froze up for a minute. So I'm glad you said that. I think one thing that Uhuru Shulu benefits from is, um, my knowledge base, and being an educator for so many years. I really work to make sure that we understand, the teaching staff and I, are online with what the standards say that children are supposed to learn by grade levels, and that we aren't holding kids accountable. So we have a schedule. We do at least 2 hours of instruction, pure instruction every day. And then the other time we do engineering, science, art. All of our students are involved in outside activities. One of our students is a member of the Davidson Institute for Profoundly Gifted Children. So we make sure that we have the test scores of every student in our class. Through our collaboration with CTD, Center for Talent Development, we get resources. And it's important for me that we do interim testing so that we can make sure that we're providing children what they need. So every one of the benefits of having our school be a micro school is that we have the two teachers. And since everyone is at a different level, every student is at a different step in a specific reading and math curriculum. Then we also bring in outside enrichment. So we have a math specialist that comes in and plays math games with them one time a week for 3 hours to develop critical thinking skills. We also have a writing only segment Black, and through grants from the state, such as the Freedom School grant, we were able to offer extended after school programming, which is drumming. They have arts, they have robotics, they have also digital design where they created their own movies. So they are going all day. It's really extremely rigorous. And at the end of the day, they feel like their brain has really worked. And I think it's benefited from having knowledgeable parents, and it's a co-op. So no one owns it fully all on their own. So all the parents have to be vetted to make sure that you have the same belief system as we do. And then we pull on the talents of the parents. So one of our parents is a lawyer in accounting, and they come in and they actually able to bring that knowledge base. We have a parent that is a designer, and it's really nice to have that. So for personally, for me, making sure I'm the parent that makes sure that the rigor is where it needs to be,
Mm-hmm.
constantly assessing students to make sure that the work that they're getting is appropriate to what they are ready to learn, not their age or what their chronological grade would be.
Right.
And so we use that using the NWEA test every year. And we also did the COGAT, with measures gifted ability
Okay.
last year with the Center for Talent Development. We do interim assessment throughout the year, and then every year we do summative testing to make sure that we're ensuring growth.
Okay.
So
So how often for starters, kudos on the individual learning plans, because I feel like every school needs to be able to do that. But you being an educator understand that that's a heavy lift in a larger setting. But
yes,
I think that every student would benefit from an ILP, because contrary to what we think, we are no longer preparing students, and haven't been for decades, no longer preparing students for the mindless factory work that those bells are preparing
exactly.
them for. So, and we never got out of that mindset. We're still preparing them for these mundane spaces until you get to see how the 1% kids are educated, and then you realize that they're being asked Socratic questions. They're being taught how to critically think. They're not moving with bells. They have the freedom to move around as they see fit, because they're being taught to be leaders versus the masses who are literally being educated to be followers.
When you think about it, Dr. Strong, how much time really is for instruction in a school? You have all these filler times, transition times. So actually, children only receive. So this was what parents had to understand, that in a homeschooling or a cooperative or alternative setting or unschooling setting, there's a lot of names, that your actual work and instructional time where you put in paper to pencil doesn't have to be 6-7 hours. Those other times, like it could be an hour or two, depending on your schedule that day. And the other time should be meant for physical activity, exploration, language development, so many other things. It's a mind shift for people to understand that sometimes a lot of times, people in the upper echelon, children aren't even attending traditional schools during their formative years. They're receiving tutoring and traveling.
I was going to say they're abroad.
Yes,
Everything is a learning experience. Like, I don't think that people realize just how much of a sponge these little kids are. It's like, you, as a parent, Kids tell you stuff about yourself that you didn't even think they were paying attention to when you were
At
talking to
all.
somebody else. Like, I remember when my oldest was little, I had to call her teacher and tell her teacher, you might want to stop making your prenatal appointments when you think the kids are doing independent reading, because I know that you got gestational diabetes. I know that you got this going on. I know that you 26 weeks. Ask me how I know this. Because my child came home and told me all your business when you thought that they weren't listening because you had stepped out into the hallway to make this phone call to your doctor while they were doing independent reading time. So I was like, just to give you a little heads up.
Recorders.
I hope you're feeling better, by the way. But
right. And that's also a mark of giftedness as well, as super hearing ability and being able to recount things in a very strategic and organized manner, and almost word for word too.
Word for word. Like, I had to call her, sis, you feel better? Because according to my kids, you're not doing so hot.
Right. Yeah, but just all those things, and it's just an exciting thing to watch them grow. I think the biggest excitement for me is the language development, how they are pushing each other in the language area, because they are all different levels, and they're all reading different things at different times, and they're really accelerating their vocabulary. It's just, and then they're using it correctly, which
That's
is also
always
a
the fun
mark
part.
of Montessori schools too, because I know you said that Ever went to one, and I
She's still
remember
there.
I went to I remember being a student teacher, and I was saying to myself, 30 years ago, like, wow, these kids, their vocabulary is so rich and their conversations are so diverse and full. And I hadn't seen that in traditional public school. And
Because
it's
nobody's
because
telling them to stay in a child's place.
exactly. And their ability to explore and learn new things at their pace, which was guiding that. So, I mean, there's just a rich thing, and it's a new learning for me. I have to unpack and unschool a lot of things within me, having gone to school in the traditional way. But I
And
think
been
that
taught to teach in that way.
taught to teach in that way. And all the parents like, so what? You can do different things and only have like an hour or two of paper. That's all your kids are getting really at school anyway.
Yeah.
When add in the transitions, add in the lunch, add in the recess.
Add
And
in
you
the
probably
disciplinary time that stops learning.
yeah, when the teacher has to stop the whole class, you could probably calculate that
Add
that's
in the announcements.
right. Announcement, and add in the fact that your child, if they are above level, are not most times getting what they need in those
Exactly.
settings.
So that kind of goes into my next question, which was going to be like, how has this been for you? What are some of the insights and things that this experience has done for you? But you kind of answered that already in terms of just kind of having to unlearn the things that you thought you knew.
Yes, for sure. I almost feel like I had this epiphany, and it's been, in some ways, I would call it courageous parenting, because, and even one of the parents, it said, it's like when you do something that not everyone is doing, even professionally. I left my professional role as a principal to really have the flexibility to focus on the co-op, which was a mind bender for me, because that's what I had done in my whole life. But it was recognizing that I could do so much more, and that there was more out there for me to do. And Yahuru Shule has been part of that transformation for me.
So, in doing my research and just kind of being an educator, Black parent at that intersection, you are not alone in that feeling, but a lot of us just don't know what to do about it. So if you had to tell parents three things, even if they wanted to, if they weren't necessarily ready to start their own micro school, or even if they were, okay, let's say they are, what are three things that you would advise parents that want to start their micro school or want to take control back of their child's education?
Well,
Three
first I
things.
would say affirm yourself, because when you're feeling that, sometimes you shove it to the back, like, oh, I'm just feeling this right now. But if you get an inkling that your child needs a different setting, first affirming yourself that you know what's best for your child. And then the second thing I did was try to start connecting with like-minded people, by doing some internet research about Black homeschoolers, Black homeschooling connections. There are groups that you can join. There are blogs that you can join with other parents that are doing that actually doing it, and actually it'll help you learn a lot about, if you so choose to do that, how you can do it. So I found a Liberated Minds website. It's a website for Black homeschoolers, where they actually have curriculum built in that you don't have to do anything about it. They do offer online classes, and they have a conference every year. It's
Hmm.
called Liberated Minds. I also came across some YouTube videos from another Black homeschooling network, about, if you want to, with like a detailed directions guide, like, get together, how can you maximize you all's potential, and how can you start the co-op at the least expensive, in the least expensive way as possible. How do you determine whether or not you don't want to pay rent? So you may want to consider having it at a parent's house initially to start, or if you want to broaden out. So there's so many resources out there that you don't have to feel like you're alone. Definitely support Liberated Minds. And there are also other homeschooling
I
groups
was gonna
in
say Black
Atlanta.
Lives Matter in school is a big one too.
Yes, yes.
I think Black Lives Matter in School Week starts tomorrow. I think
Oh,
it's
does it really?
yeah, I think so. It's usually yeah, I think so. I have to check that out, but I'm almost positive it does.
Yeah.
So how do you pay for this?
Oh, so that's the thing. The parents pay out their pocket. Now, our school had a grant. Well, let me back up. So our school has a lot of resources, and they
Hmm.
were offering a grant to help fund it. But they were prioritizing states. Some states, depending on the state, they give parents that choose to homeschool, they give them back the funds so that they can finance our
Hmm.
alternatives. But Illinois is not one of those states. But I
Of
know
course
they
not.
do that.
Scratch that off my list.
Yes, yeah, but some states, they give homeschooling parents back the money so they can do traditional, they can have different options for their children, because you're still going to be funding your child's education, just in a different way. And at a Uhuru Shule, we pay tuition out of our pocket to fund the teachers, and that tuition funds the trips. And we use my home. Thank God for that, being able to do that, to have the first floor of my home that we converted into a school space so that we don't have to pay rent in a building. And it's been a great experience. It's been a tremendous learning experience too.
Well, I appreciate you for coming. I have learned a lot because, I've been on this journey toward trying to make more equitable school spaces for so long. And it's kind of been my passion and my life's work. And one of the things that I really had to realize is that sometimes we won't be able to make those spaces as equitable as we want them to be. And so to be able to provide alternatives when you run into that and kind of have a framework and a map of how to do that, will be helpful to a lot of parents that are looking and they're like, yeah, you made some strides, but that's still, I'm still not satisfied. And you have that right. And so I do want to just close by thanking you for taking the time to talk to me today and to kind of enlighten us on how to literally be the change that we want to see in the world. So
Oh, thank you very much for having me, Dr. Strong. It's always a pleasure.
always. So I guess you've been listening to Strong Conversations, hot takes from a cultural firebrand. Make sure to like our Facebook page at Strong Conversations or follow us on Twitter at Dr. Carolyn Strong. Until next time, have a good one.